Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of leaders here in the United States and then beyond. Today with us, a very interesting guest. Her name, Regina Bain, and Regina comes to us from the Louis Armstrong House Museum in Queens, New York. Let's all welcome Regina Bain. And Regina, thank you so much for joining. And I want to start first with what exactly is the Louis Armstrong Museum?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here to share the story of Louis Armstrong. So Louis Armstrong, most people know him because of What a Wonderful World, this amazing ballad. Some people know him because of his amazing trumpet. He was the first Black pop star at the turn of the century. And people know that he was born in New Orleans. Fewer people know that he lived in Corona, Queens for 30 years. And the home that he lived in is now a national and city landmark and is the site of our museum. And people can come and tour the museum at any time.
Yes, and he was such an interesting man. I remember his big smile. I also remember the song Hello, Dolly, and I remember him playing trumpet. My father happened to be a trumpet player, someone who had studied at Juilliard and then played in big bands and then became a teacher. And trumpet was very much part of our home. And so was Louis Armstrong. And
I love that.
he was such a dynamo, and besides being a great talent, he was a great personality. And of course, we'll all remember him as a great American icon. Now, I understand the museum is actually a historical landmark in the United States. And what a great thing to have this museum be. And how did that come about?
It came about as a result of his wife. His wife, Lucille Armstrong, lived for almost 11 years past Louis Armstrong's death. And she used that 11 years to secure Louis Armstrong's legacy. She knew that she wanted this home to be preserved as a museum. So she worked with the foundation that she and Louis set up and made sure to advocate for it to become a national and a New York historic landmark. And so it was through her efforts that she secured that designation.
She was a very smart woman, to say the
Yes,
least.
she was. Mm-hmm.
Now, something else about Louis Armstrong that very few people watching this show probably know, and that is that he was a major activist. Talk a little bit about some of his work in the field of activism, especially for people of color, correct?
Yes, definitely. So he was an amazing artistic musical genius, and people know him for that. Fewer people know about what it took to be that musical genius at the turn of the century. So he recorded one of the first racially integrated records called Knocking a Jug in 1929. He recorded the first interracial duet, Rocking Chair with Hoagy Carmichael. He was one of the first African-American artists to have written in his contract that he would not play in a hotel unless he could stay there. He was the first African-American to publish an autobiography, Swing That Music, in 1936. And he was one of the first African-Americans to command featured billing in a Hollywood film with Pennies from Heaven in 1936. So many firsts that were a part of his legacy. And one of the stories that many people don't know about him is the story of how he integrated with the Little Rock Nine. Do you know that story?
I do not.
Yes, I would love to share it. I think many folks don't know it. And he was one of the people who spoke out when there were a group of students, Black students, who were attempting to integrate a school, and he in Arkansas, and it was not going well. And he thought that President Eisenhower should interfere and speak up on behalf of these kids. But Louis Armstrong was beloved in America. He was not known to speak up in this way. People adored him for his craft, but they didn't know him as an activist. So when he did speak up, it caused a stir, and people were upset. But he really believed in this fight for education for all. And he made a difference. After he spoke up, things changed. And those students were able to enroll and make a difference.
I like him even more now that I hear that story, because I think one thing is to be a great musician and to be a great performer, but another thing is to take a stand and to do something to better life for all human beings. And here we hear the story of Louis Armstrong, who not only was a great performer and a real icon in the world of music and entertainment, and we're also hearing that he did a lot to help other people and tried to do what he could to end or reduce segregation in the United States. And that makes him a real hero in my book. Now,
Yes.
yes, and we need more people like him. And if we all come together and work together, will things change? Now, getting back to the museum, it is one of Queens' great treasures and one of the United States' great treasures. I understand you're just completing a renovation or an expansion, and that the museum will now be 14,000 square feet and a few different buildings. And when is that set to open?
Yes, we are so excited about the expansion of the museum. So our crown jewel is, of course, the House Museum, the place where Louis and Lucille lived for 30 years. And so that continues to be preserved. It is the home, it's the next door garden, a Japanese style garden that Lucille built for Louis when he had heart attacks, and she wanted to create a space of peace for him. So that is our crown jewel. Across the street from that historic house, we are building a 14,000 square foot Armstrong Center, 15 years in the making, close to $25 million building. It's going to house a jazz club in the back for performances. It's going to house the Armstrong Archives, a 60,000 piece archives, the largest of any jazz musician. And it's going to have a multimedia exhibit that's being curated by jazz pianist and visual artist and MacArthur genius, Jason Moran. We're very excited about this, and it's due to open this fall. So be on the lookout for a ribbon cutting event and more to come.
All very exciting. Now, you mentioned that it cost $25 million for this renovation or expansion project. Well, you're a charity, you're a 501c3. Did you actually go out and raise that money, or where did it come from? Or were you government funded?
Yes, so those funds came from New York State, New York City, and we are incredibly thankful for the generosity of our community. Of course, we have individual donors, we have government funds, we have foundations, we have corporations who all make up our philanthropic community. Without them, we could not exist. And so we are deeply thankful for what they have done for us. And we've been around for many years, but we've stayed small. We were relatively small, a $1 million organization. With the opening of the new building next year, we expect to grow to a $2 million building organization. And as we develop the programs and really make that building come to life, we expect to grow to a $3 million organization. So that type of exponential growth requires exponential infrastructure growth as well. And so those are the things that we're putting together now.
Yes, and it's very nice to see when government, when foundations, when private individuals all work together to create a very special museum. Now, we are with our wonderful executive director of the Louis Armstrong Museum, her name, Regina Bain, and Regina is describing the museum. She's been talking a little bit about Louis Armstrong, And now we're going to hear a little bit about Regina. Regina, you have come to the museum from a background, I think, in the private or the public sector. And with coming to the museum, you've brought a lot of know-how. And one thing I think it's very important for people to realize is that the executive director of a museum or a charity is not just someone who happens to like music, but is a real business person. So Regina, talk a little bit about your background and how you came about becoming executive director of the Louis Armstrong Museum.
Yes. So I am thankful to have had the experiences that I've had that have made me who I am. I studied theater and African American studies as an undergrad. I went on to the Yale School of Drama and studied acting. And so I existed as an artist in New York for many years. Throughout my time as an artist, I was always invested in education, teaching playwriting, teaching students. And I became a part of the Posse Foundation, a college access and leadership program based in New York, but in 10 different cities around the country. It's a $24 million organization, and I was the associate vice president there for 17 years. And then I said, what's next? And what was next for me was something that combined my artistic background and my education background and the knowledge that I had gained being a part of this multi-city $24 million organization. And I said, the Louis Armstrong House Museum came across my desk and it seemed perfect for me, on the cusp of incredible growth, grounded in a mission that is about the arts and also about teaching future students about music and how music brings people together. So that's why I came to the Louis Armstrong House Museum, and it's been perfect.
And it's nice to see that the executive director has a tremendous history in the arts and education. And let's move to the field of education. A museum is a place where people come to learn. And I understand you have quite a few educational programs. Talk a little bit about some of those.
Yes. So education is the foundation of what we do. One of the first programs, even before there was an actual museum where people could walk through the house, was an education program called Pops is Tops. So Pops is one of the nicknames for Louis Armstrong. He has many nicknames. One of them is Pops. And so Pops is Tops is a children's concert that happens in the garden next door to the historic house every summer. Thousands of public school students in Corona, Queens, experience a world-class jazz concert where they learn about musical concepts, they learn about the cultures that the music came from, and learn about how to apply concepts like improvisation, swing, listening to their lives. And so that concert formed the foundation of our education programs. From there, we've grown to Voices of Freedom, with K through 12 students learning from multidisciplinary artists about their process and then creating works of their own. That's both online, it's in person. We work in classrooms throughout New York and throughout Long Island, actually, and around the world. We actually did a program with other countries recently because Louis Armstrong traveled to 64 different countries, and those people and those students can benefit from the story of Louis Armstrong as well. So education is deeply important to us and is the foundation of what we do.
Very nice. And what about opportunities for people to volunteer and help out at the museum? Do you have many of those opportunities available?
Yes. So one of the things that we are able to do with this new building is with new space comes new vision. So we're able to expand from preserving the legacy of Louis Armstrong to also living the Armstrong values of artistic excellence, of education, and of community. And there are volunteer opportunities in all of those areas. One of the ways that people can volunteer with us is to become a docent. As a docent, you learn all about the history of Louis Armstrong, the history of the house in Corona, Queens, and you guide people from all around our nation and all around the world through the home, telling the story. It's a really great way to meet people and learn about what their interaction with Louis is. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's about the design of the home, and have an experience with them. So we love that. We also have volunteers who help out with our events. We have concerts in our garden, and soon we'll have concerts indoors in the new building. And so we always need, when we have 250, 300 people in the space, we need folks to help us with that experience. And we work with students. And so there are ways that people can volunteer to help that process as well.
All very exciting. We are with Regina Bain. She is the executive director of the Louis Armstrong House Museum, located in Corona, Queens. And Regina, another thing, fundraising is all very important to any museum or to any charity. Do you have any fundraising events coming up in 2022?
Yes. So we will be hosting our annual gala. It's been virtual for the past 2 years, but also very successful financially. And so we're very thankful to our community for supporting us during the pandemic for those virtual galas. But in this coming year, we would like to return in person and gather if we can. We don't have a specific date for that yet, but we expect to be sharing that soon on our website, which is louisarmstronghouse.org.
And if someone wants to donate, that's the website, correct?
Yes, it is louisarmstronghouse.org. And we definitely need donations. We have the possibility for memberships. So members are able to have free entry into the museum, specialized events that are just for members. So for example, when we open the new building across the street from the historic home, members will have a members only event to come early and see the space. So membership is a great way to support the museum and become a part of this jazz community, this music community, this education community. And all of that can be found at our website.
Very, very nice. And this is just so interesting to me because I never knew that there was a Louis Armstrong Museum anywhere. And to know this now is, to me, something I want to go and do. So thank you very, very much. And we have a few minutes left. And I wanted to ask you, Regina, you have had this flourishing, exciting career. And my show is all about philanthropy. We try to motivate people to get involved as philanthropists by donating time, by donating knowledge, and then available resources. But philanthropy is also about those that get involved working for different organizations like yourself. And has it been a labor of love? And what advice would you give to someone who maybe wants to work for an institution such as the Louis Armstrong Museum?
Yes, so it is definitely a labor of love. And the advice I would give is to find something. This is both for people who want to work at a place like a museum, but also want to give to a nonprofit organization, is to find something that aligns with your values, that aligns with your history, your experience, and something that you love. So there are many people who have music in their background, either for themselves because they've been a part of a music arts education program that have made a difference in their life, or because of a family who were musicians and it mattered. It mattered to them, it mattered to community. That's who we would love to be a part of our community, as staff people, as philanthropists, as people who are supporting the next generation. Because what's really important about jazz is that it continues, that we are supporting the next generation of jazz players, jazz lovers, music lovers, so that they can see what's in it for them and why they should learn about history and why it matters. So find the thing that matters to you, that aligns with your values and your experience. And you can only flourish from there.
All very good advice. Regina, what advice would you give to somebody very young who maybe wants to have a career in the music industry and maybe is finding it difficult?
Yes. So the music industry definitely is difficult and different. We work primarily with the jazz genre, but there are multiple genres that intersect with jazz. And it's challenging to stay focused on craft, but that is what is incredibly important. Louis Armstrong was a craftsman. His horn was something that he worked on and practiced for hours. And he was known as a genius because of that. He was one of the first to step forward from the bandstand and to claim the microphone, to claim space, because he was excellent. And he couldn't have done that if he didn't have the skill to back up his swagger. So it's important to hone your craft, to practice, to be excellent. One of the things that people don't necessarily associate with Louis Armstrong is innovation of technology. But for his time, he was at the cutting edge of technology. And so I think most young people today, they know the value of this, but being on the cutting edge of technology, but not using it as a crutch. Hone your craft, know the technology, and blend them together to create something innovative and new.
Yes, and he had something else too. He had a great personality
Yes, he
and
did.
a great love of life, and it just exuded from him. So he was really a very, very special man. But I love your advice to hone in on your craft, really know your material, combine it with technology, and work at it every day. I think that's good advice for just about anyone in any field. And Regina, you've really been a terrific guest. You've shared your knowledge, you've shared knowledge about Louis Armstrong and the museum, and you've given advice. Thank you very, very much. This concludes Successful Philanthropy. Our guest today, Regina Bain, and Regina is the Executive Director of the Louis Armstrong House Museum located in Queens, New York. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.